The scent of ionized air filters always signaled one of two things at CitySense Innovations: a server reboot or a termination, and the servers had been humming perfectly that morning. Rose Adams, Vice President of Urban Data Analytics, walked into the 15th floor Innovation Lab, as she had countless times before. But this time, there were no schematics on the whiteboards, no quarterly projection models, just Chad Harrington, sitting there in his custom-tailored jacket and self-satisfied smirk, flanked by an HR representative who appeared to have perfected neutrality in front of a mirror. "Rose?" Chad began, clasping his hands like he was starring in a tech startup commercial. "Thanks for coming. You're dismissed. No precursor, no discussion. Just those two blunt words, 'You're dismissed,' as if she were merely an intern who had misfiled a document. She didn't falter, not outwardly. She reached down, picked up her company-issued tablet, and gave a polite nod that could have solidified concrete. Internally, a relentless tremor began. 8 years, 4 CEOs, 5 architectural overhauls, a dozen seemingly impossible platform launches, and now she was being discarded by a man who still thought big data was a new concept. Her smart heels echoed through the glass corridor as she walked out. No tears, no outburst, just that familiar box. The one they always pretended you packed yourself, as if they hadn't just swept your entire professional life into it while you were on your lunch break. Her assistant, Liam, avoided eye contact, subtly sliding out his phone and typing something quickly. A notification buzzed in her pocket before she even reached the elevator. "It's already moved into your office." "Classy." Her security badge wouldn't even activate on her way down, already deactivated. They hadn't even waited until after lunch. She looked at the building one last time through the lobby's finger-smudged glass, her reflection distorted next to the etched slogan on the door. "Where foresight shapes the future." Right. What no one in that building knew, what Chad didn't know, was that Rose wasn't your typical VP. 5 years prior, during CitySense's frantic integration with a struggling urban planning startup, the lawyers had embedded a subtle clause deep within the transition documents. Something about transitional executives and temporary data governance proxies for seamless continuity. Nobody paid attention at the time. Nobody bothered to read it. Nobody, except Rose. And over the years, while Chad was preoccupied with schmoozing investors and botching internal morale surveys, Rose had quietly retained those proxy authorities. Every time a board member retired and their data governance vote defaulted, she meticulously documented it. Every time they reaffirmed their trust in her operational insights, she signed the necessary paperwork. She held the true leverage, 92.1%, and as Chad settled into her former chair, probably spinning around in it like a child high on sugary drinks, Rose was already on her way home, not to brood, but to unlock the drawer, the one with the dusty board meeting packets, old contracts, and that acquisition folder no one had touched since 2018. Because Chad had just fired the one person in the company who couldn't legally be dismissed without her own explicit consent. And worse, he had absolutely no idea. The ride down in the elevator felt like the longest 12 floors of Rose's life. She stood there, boxed in with a stapler, 3 framed photos, and a stress ball from the 2016 wellness initiative that had probably given 5 people carpal tunnel syndrome. No one uttered a word. The intern from marketing wouldn't even look at her. She heard someone cough and offer a fake, cheerful good luck. As the doors closed, as if she were embarking on a vacation to some exotic destination instead of corporate exile, the final indignity hit. Her badge didn't work at the turnstile. Security had to buzz her out, like a shoplifter at a discount store. The guard gave her a look, not pity, just that awkward grimace people make when they know you've been thrown to the wolves and they're next in line. She drove home with the AC blasting and the radio off, too numb for music. Thoughts looped in jagged fragments. "You're dismissed. 8 years. Trim the fat. Loyalty means nothing. Every turn of the wheel just scraped the rust off another layer of suppressed fury. It wasn't just the firing, it was the abrupt, dismissive manner of it. No performance review, no metrics, no paper trail. Just Chad, some polished public speaker with a smooth, droning voice and a 5-step plan for eliminating legacy friction. The friction, apparently, was her. By the time she pulled into her driveway, her phone lit up again. This time, it was Olivia from finance. "You didn't hear this from me, but Chad told legal last week he was eliminating strategic clutter. Your name was on a slide. Strategic clutter, like she was a dusty old paperweight." She sat on the couch, still gripping the handle of that damn box, and stared at the dark TV. She thought of the 3-day weekends she'd sacrificed, the holidays spent debugging complex urban simulation models. 100 times she'd covered for Chad's chaotic project launches when no one else could decipher his vague, buzzword-laden memos. He had swaggered into the company 6 months ago like he had invented urban development, and now he was king. Her email access was gone. So was the VPN. But her memories weren't, and neither were the receipts. Rose took out the box, dug under the foam stress ball, and pulled out a dusty manila folder, hand-labeled in her precise, almost illegible handwriting. Bridge proxy, data governance structure. She hadn't looked at it in years because she never thought she'd need to. Chad never once asked her about data voting rights. He probably never even knew that when CitySense absorbed UrbaneX Analytics, the board had granted her temporary proxy control over a handful of non-voting shares for continuity and transition alignment. The temporary clause that somehow never got phased out, one that was quietly renewed each year because no one on the board ever rescinded it, because Rose was competent, because no one expected her to be tossed out like a half-used printer cartridge. She did some quick calculations. 3 retirees, 2 still inactive, 1 under investigation and recusing himself. Every data governance vote they'd never reclaimed had flowed back to her. By the last audit, she had over 92% of default proxy control. Chad hadn't just fired a VP. He'd illegally dismissed an executive with significant board-weighted authority. And while he was busy moving his ergonomic keyboard into her desk, and probably ordering team mugs with his new catchphrase, "Insight trumps intuition," Rose was flipping through every document he hadn't bothered to read. She wasn't going to scream. She wasn't going to tweet. She wasn't going to write a lengthy social media post about corporate betrayal. She was going to do something far more dangerous. She was going to read the fine print. The manila folder was heavier than it looked, as if the past 8 years had solidified into the cardstock. Rose laid it out on her kitchen table beside a chipped mug of cold coffee and the takeout she didn't remember ordering. The lights were dim. The only sound the occasional hum of her refrigerator and the rhythmic beat of her own pulse. It felt like she was unsealing evidence from a crime scene. First came the old board packets, thick, yellowing, annotated in her ruthless handwriting. She flipped past the corporate culture decks and the tone-deaf sustainability audits until she found it. The original post-merger resolution from the UrbaneX acquisition, Clause 3.7, Paragraph D. In the event of executive transition, data governance voting rights from all legacy UrbaneX board designates shall be temporarily assigned to the active bridge executive for continuity oversight, pending reassignment or redistribution at the discretion of said board. She read it 3 times. The sentence had always been dry, unremarkable, shrouded in legal jargon and corporate dust. But now it pulsed with something electric, something Chad would have called a liability. She called it destiny. Her authority had never been revoked. Not once. She'd simply kept her head down, her work flawless, and the board never questioned it. Over the years, board members stepped down, retired, got indicted for insider trading. The proxies, they defaulted to her and stayed there. She grabbed a notepad and started tallying. Of the 11 board votes, 4 had transitioned and defaulted to her. Two more had quietly delegated theirs during internal restructuring. That put her at 6, held by her directly. 7 votes. That was 92.1%. She triple-checked the bylaws. Firing a legacy executive with data governance authority required a supermajority of 92%. Chad had missed it by 0.1%, and he had just escorted her out with all the confidence of a man who thought bylaws were mere suggestions and legal ease was for interns. Rose leaned back in her chair, eyes wide and glassy, one hand resting on the folder as if it might purr. A sharp clarity washed over her, not like adrenaline, but like ice water, refreshing, dangerous. She hadn't been fired. She had been unlawfully dismissed. Chad's little HR stunt wasn't just sloppy. It was a procedural grenade with the pin still in. He'd sat there smirking, as if he were swiping left on a bad dating profile, not realizing he was firing the only person in the building who could remove him from power. She poured herself a shot of the emergency whiskey hidden behind the spice rack, downed it in one, coughed, then laughed. A loud, ugly, cathartic sound. God, he really thought he'd won. He thought she'd take the cardboard box, the humiliation, the digital exile, and vanish. That she'd retreat to some online post about taking space to heal and spend her days journaling about boundaries while he played Empire with her meticulously built urban data workflows. She stood up abruptly, shoved aside the cold leftovers, and pulled a dusty banker's box out from beneath the kitchen island. Inside were 3 years of quarterly planning decks, a thumb drive labeled System Backup, and her original copy of the transition agreement with margin notes in red ink. She'd been the last one who still printed anything, the only one who kept receipts, literal and metaphorical. Her fingers moved fast now, flipping through data governance voting charts, proxy ledgers, even the email chain confirming the annual extension of her bridge executive role. All still valid, all still time-stamped, all damning. Chad hadn't read any of it. Why would he? He came from the kind of startup culture where you replaced people like software updates and assumed compliance came with a smile. But Rose wasn't code. She wasn't plug and play. She was a fundamental structure, and Chad had just yanked the wrong beam. Rose didn't send angry texts. She didn't throw glassware or post cryptic social media statuses with sad emojis and hashtags like #nextchapter. Instead, she opened a new spreadsheet, titled it Board Mapping, Confidential, and began populating names, voting weights, and historical alignment patterns, as if she were solving a complex puzzle. Because in a way, she was. She started with Brenda Chen, audit chair. They'd shared a hotel wall in Portland during the budget retreat, commiserating over artisanal coffee and mutual disdain for Chad's vision decks. Rose kept it light. "Hey Brenda, just checking in. Hope you're settling in under our new fearless leader." Brenda's silence crackled down the line for a beat too long. Then, "Chad's energetic. He thinks that counts for everything." Rose understood the unspoken translation. No one trusts him, but no one's ready to say it first. One by one, Rose discreetly contacted the others. Scott from legal, still nursing a grudge from when Chad butchered the data privacy compliance workflow. Priya Sharma from procurement, furious after her headcount got slashed by 30% and Chad blamed legacy inefficiencies. Rose didn't ask for direct support yet, just planted seeds, gauged their sentiment, let them vent. Because people talk more when they feel heard. And Chad, bless his overly styled head, didn't listen. He announced, he restructured, he optimized. By the end of the second day, Rose had 7 out of 11 board members either open to coffee or concerned about recent leadership style shifts. That was bureaucratic code for, give me a reason. Meanwhile, Chad was doing what Chad does best, overreaching. His first company-wide email was titled Welcome to the Chad Era, which read like it had been written by an AI after 3 energy drinks. Phrases like breaking the silos of inertia and flattening legacy hierarchies made her physically wince. He gave an interview to Urban Tech Weekly where he referred to CitySense as a beautiful fixer-upper, and when asked about Rose's departure, he said, "Sometimes evolution requires the shedding of static roles." Static. She paused the video, screenshot his smug face, and named the file Static This JPG. But the real gem came late Thursday from Olivia in finance. The text: "Check out line 348 of the quarterly draft ledger. Consulting payout doesn't match anything in procurement." Rose pulled up the leaked ledger Olivia had quietly shared. There it was, $128,400, consulting services, Green Grid Innovations. She dug. Green Grid wasn't on any approved vendor list. Its website consisted of 2 pages and a generic contact email. The listed founder, Scarlett Hayes, Chad's girlfriend, Rose had met her once at a company picnic. Scarlett claimed to be a sustainability impact strategist, which apparently meant hosting virtual workshops on eco-friendly city design and providing motivational PDFs. And now Chad had funneled 6 figures into her LLC through a backdoor payout. No bid, no RFP, no oversight. It wasn't just sketchy, it was fraud adjacent. Rose cross-referenced travel receipts from the same week. Chad had flown to San Francisco for an investor conference. Green Grid's business license had been registered in California that same weekend. He was sloppy. God, he was so sloppy and arrogant enough to think the board wouldn't care or wouldn't notice. Rose started a new file. Ethics violations, C. Harrington. She dropped in the consulting contract, screenshots of Green Grid's sparse site, a copy of Scarlett's social media post. "Closing major deals with my favorite disruptor, #FounderLife, #Sustainable Impact." The caption was overlaid on a poolside cocktail and what appeared to be Chad's hand, wearing his distinctive smartwatch. He had publicly exposed himself with geotags. By Friday evening, Rose's mood had shifted. This wasn't about reclaiming her role. This was about exposing a parasite. Chad wasn't a threat anymore. He was an infection. Rose, she had the cure. Saturday morning hit with a migraine and a moral hangover. Not guilt. Rose had buried that years ago under executive dashboards and Q4 forecasts. But the weight of knowing what came next wasn't a game. It was war. She brewed the strongest coffee she could manage, black as her mood, and stared at the folder now swelling with incriminating documents. She had enough to draw blood, but drawing blood meant getting some on her own hands. The first call came from Scott Davies, board legal counsel and professional fence sitter. They met in a parking lot behind an overpriced coffee shop, both in sunglasses as if it were a covert operation. Scott kept his voice low and his eyes on the car dashboard. "I looked into the clauses," he muttered. "You're right. You've got standing." Rose nodded, already knowing. Then came the warning. "But you make this move, he'll retaliate. Chad's connected. Accuse him of ethics violations and misuse of funds. He'll come after you legally, personally. He'll find something. Fabricate if he has to." Rose took a long sip of her coffee, staring out the windshield. "Let him try." Scott sighed. "Just be smart. Don't underestimate how dirty this will get." Then he left without a pastry. Later that day, a knock at her door. It was Priya. No call, no text, just a trench coat and urgency. "I shouldn't be here," she said, slipping through the doorway. She opened her purse and pulled out a sealed envelope as if it were radioactive. Inside, an NDA stamped, signed, dated 4 months ago. It belonged to Dr. Evelyn Vance, former head of talent acquisition. Quiet, sharp, vanished without a goodbye right around the time Chad joined. The NDA was thick, littered with clauses and hush language, but one detail lit up like a flare. Compensated severance upon non-disclosure of internal complaint regarding executive misconduct and breach of professional boundaries. Rose flipped to the appendix. There it was. Chad Harrington, accused of inappropriate conduct during an executive offsite. Evelyn had filed a complaint. Within 2 weeks, she'd been transitioned out with a cash package and a confidentiality muzzle. The head of talent acquisition hadn't been fired for performance. She'd been silenced. Rose stared at the page until the ink blurred. Then she opened her laptop and began digging deeper into the expense reports. If Chad had buried one body, there'd be more. CitySense's expense portal wasn't particularly well protected, at least not from someone who'd built the workflow herself. She started with the San Francisco trip, pulled every reimbursement filed in that time frame. One line item stood out. Executive travel. Client dinner, $3,150. The Urban Plate restaurant. She knew that restaurant, knew it wasn't anywhere near San Francisco. It was in New York. Chad hadn't been there that week, but his corporate card had. She pulled security footage logs, another system she'd helped design, and cross-referenced badge activity. Chad's badge hadn't scanned anywhere near headquarters that week. It was a ghost dinner, a fake meeting, just another chunk of money shoved into the shadows. Then came the kicker. Another line item, backdated. Team retreat facilitation, $6,200. Green Grid Innovations. Rose snorted. Facilitation, huh? At this point, the pattern was sickening. Padded budgets, shadow contracts, silenced employees. It wasn't just unethical. It was surgical. Chad had weaponized the very infrastructure she'd built to make himself untouchable. Until now. She organized everything into a secure digital vault. Board proxies, NDA scans, expense discrepancies, timestamps, digital logs, all meticulously labeled, all sorted. She stared at the files as if they were explosives, because in the wrong hands, they were. If she miscalculated, if she went public too soon, if the board faltered, if Chad got wind before she moved, it wouldn't just be her job on the line. He'd bury her in lawsuits, drag her through litigation hell until she was a burned-out ghost, writing think pieces from a shared co-working space in a forgotten suburb. But she wasn't bluffing. Rose Adams had spent 8 years building the engine. Now she was rewiring it to eject the man trying to drive it off a cliff. The email she sent at 9:02 a.m. on Monday was surgical in tone, stripped of drama, and lethal in content. Subject: Notice of Procedural Violation. Clause 3.7 Compliance Failure. She carbon-copied every board member, the general counsel, and the external auditing firm. No flourish, no overt vengeance, just a cold recitation of legal facts. The improperly processed termination of a legacy executive with protected proxy control, citing Clause 3.7, Paragraph D, Line 14. She attached the documents, the voting history, the ownership flowcharts, the acquisition clause that Chad had steamrolled in his rush to modernize, then just one final line. Accordingly, I am contesting the validity of my termination and submitting formal notice of intent to pursue internal remedies outlined in Section 9 of the Board Oversight Charter, including review of executive conduct under ethical compliance protocols. Translation: I'm not just contesting the firing, I'm coming for him. By noon, the air inside CitySense Innovations' glossy headquarters was thick with panic. Chad scrambled, first with a company-wide town hall scheduled at breakneck speed. A leadership vision session, the invite said, sent to all staff with a little fireworks emoji, as if it were a damn party. Inside the boardroom, he stood before a whiteboard, trying to pitch clarity and change and forward momentum. But his voice cracked 3 times, and he mispronounced key initiatives. People noticed. Rose watched the live stream from her laptop, earbuds in, one eyebrow raised. Her face betrayed nothing, but inside, her pulse was a drum solo. Chad looked like a meteorologist caught lying about a hurricane that had already made landfall. Then came his PR play. He leaked to Urban Tech Weekly again, telling a reporter off record that a disgruntled former executive was misrepresenting outdated procedural language in an attempt to cling to obsolete influence. Obsolete was rich. She didn't respond, not publicly. Instead, she worked. She finished drafting the motion. Title: Proposal for Executive Termination. CEO, Chad Harrington. Referent Ethics Breach Protocol. The contents were sharp as a scalpel. She listed every known ethics violation: the consulting payout to Green Grid Innovations, the falsified travel expenses, the silenced HR complaint backed by an NDA, the mismanagement of corporate funds for personal benefit. Each section was paired with irrefutable evidence. She quoted CitySense's own ethics charter, cited the bylaws, included financial discrepancies, internal messages, and Chad's own social media likes that aligned a little too perfectly with the spending timeline. It was methodical. It was unassailable. She printed copies on thick white linen paper and slid them into individual folders. No email this time. These were meant to be felt, to be heard. By mid-afternoon, she scheduled a private meeting with Chairman David Reynolds, a man who valued decorum more than democracy and hated surprises more than lawsuits. He read the file cover to cover. When he looked up, his face was pale. "You're sure about this?" he asked. Rose folded her hands. "Yes." There was a long silence, then a nod. "Then we'll call a vote." Outside, the autumn sky cracked open and spilled a long, low roll of thunder. Rose didn't flinch. Her hands were steady, her voice calm. She wasn't here to reclaim her seat. She wasn't here to gloat or reclaim some flimsy idea of vindication. She was here to excise the corruption from the core. Chad thought this was still about layoffs, about reorgs, about business. He didn't realize it had become something else entirely. Accountability now had a face, and it was hers. Chad strutted into the 26th floor boardroom that Wednesday, as if he were entering a lavish birthday brunch held in his own honor. He wore a navy sport coat with one of those decorative, useless pocket squares, and had the audacity to high-five the head of marketing on the way in. "She won't show," he whispered to someone as he passed, loud enough for the assistant at reception to hear. "But if she does, it'll be a good laugh. Let her blow off steam." He had called the emergency board session under the pretense of clarifying recent procedural confusion. No mention of Clause 3.7. No mention of ethics breaches, just vague allusions to executive alignment and reaffirming confidence in leadership. It was classic Chad, polishing the table while the termites devoured the legs. Downstairs, Rose stepped out of the elevator in a slate gray blazer, hair pulled back tight, eyes unreadable. She wasn't invited. She didn't need to be. The receptionist opened her mouth to speak, hesitated, then looked down instead. "No badge? No problem." Rose walked straight through the glass doors as if they still bore her initials. Inside the boardroom, conversation slowed when she appeared. Not silence, just that weird, sharp intake of breath a room takes when something truly significant enters. Chad looked up, startled, but quickly recovered. He forced a smirk. "Well, I guess the rumors of your demise were exaggerated." Rose didn't reply. She placed her folder, thicker now, on the center of the table. Its leather-bound weight landed with a soft thud that somehow echoed. Chairman Reynolds cleared his throat. "Miss Adams, we've reviewed your materials thoroughly." She gave a single nod, controlled, almost serene. Reynolds continued. "In light of the evidence, and per protocol under Article 4, Section B, you are within your rights to propose a motion." She met his eyes. "Then I move to call the vote for the immediate removal of CEO Chad Harrington on grounds of ethics violations, financial misconduct, and breach of internal policy, with documentation provided." The room didn't gasp. It paused, the way an orchestra pauses just before the conductor drops the baton. Chad barked a laugh. "Seriously?" he said, turning to the others. You can't be entertaining this. She's mad she got phased out, and now she's digging up old office gossip like this is some corporate witch hunt. He looked around the table, waiting for chuckles, for loyalty, for something. Nothing, folks? He tried again, gesturing to the binder. Green Grid was above board. Every consulting contract was signed off, and the travel reimbursements were clerical mix-ups. Are we really going to act like this is a major scandal? His voice cracked on that last word. His left hand tugged at his cufflink, the one shaped like a tiny rocket ship. The silence grew claws. Rose didn't gloat, didn't blink. She stood there like a surgeon waiting for the anesthesia to take full effect. She'd seen the financial panic behind Priya's eyes, seen the discomfort in Scott's shifting posture. She knew every micro-expression in this room, and more importantly, she knew which way the votes were about to swing. Chad didn't. He still thought this was about politics, about back channels, about charm. He didn't see the ledger. He didn't see the NDA. He didn't see the wreckage of people like Dr. Evelyn Vance, who had trusted the system to protect them. Rose adjusted her sleeve and waited. The chairman tapped his pen. The board will now proceed with individual votes. And Chad finally stopped smiling. Rose opened the folder with the calm of a woman performing a precise, silent operation. She didn't rush. She didn't monologue. She laid out the facts like instruments on a sterile tray. First, she said, placing a printed ledger at the center of the table. A 128,400 payout to Green Grid Innovations, unauthorized, unvetted, and routed through discretionary funds without procurement oversight. She flipped to the next page. Green Grid is owned by Scarlett Hayes, registered just 4 days before the payout, Mr. Harrington's girlfriend. She didn't need to say the rest. The implication sat there, pungent, like stale air in a closed room. Second, she continued, presenting a new document. Expense reimbursements tied to falsified travel. San Francisco trip filed for Smart City Data Analysis dinners in Manhattan. Timeline overlaps with the Green Grid registration. We cross-referenced badge activity and air travel. Mr. Harrington never left New York. A few board members shifted in their seats. The air grew denser. Third, she placed the final envelope gently, like a loaded weapon. An NDA, signed by Dr. Evelyn Vance, former head of talent acquisition, removed after filing a formal complaint about Mr. Harrington's behavior during the Atlanta offsite. The payout was buried in retention discretionary. This was an internal silencing, not a termination. Scott from legal looked like he'd swallowed a stapler. Priya's jaw flexed once, then set. Chad stood abruptly. This is slander, he snapped. You're manipulating documentation. That NDA was standard, and the consulting contracts were cleared. This is a desperate attempt to hijack the company. Chairman Reynolds didn't even look up. Sit down, Chad. Chad blinked. Excuse me? You've spoken. Miss Adams has presented her motion. The board will vote now. Chad remained standing, but didn't speak again. Reynolds turned to his right. Brenda, aye? Aye. One hand raised. Scott paused. Then, aye. 2. Priya. She didn't hesitate. Aye. 3. Chad's expression collapsed in slow motion. His teeth clenched, but his smile didn't appear. His shoulders stiffened as if they were trying to contain panic and failing. The vote moved clockwise. 4, 5, 6. Rose didn't count, didn't move. She stood there like granite. The ghost of 8 years of thankless labor coiled behind her eyes. By the time Reynolds reached the last board member, Chad looked half submerged, like a man slipping underwater who hasn't realized he's already drowned. Reynolds nodded. The motion passes. The room exhaled. Rose didn't. She didn't smirk, didn't blink, just watched the moment hit him like a slow-motion car crash. The realization that he was no longer talking at the room. He was being talked over. He opened his mouth again, closed it. No one cared what he had to say anymore. This wasn't his meeting. Hell, it had never been. It just took him 8 months, $200,000 in sketchy consulting, and one bulldozed executive to figure it out. The chairman's voice cut through the thick air with finality. Effective immediately, Chad Harrington is removed as Chief Executive Officer of CitySense Innovations, pending formal ratification and transfer of executive authority. HR and compliance will initiate transition protocol. No ceremony, no applause, just the dull sound of a kingdom quietly changing hands. Chad stood motionless for a beat, hands at his sides, mouth slightly open as if he were buffering. He glanced around the room, looking for a life raft. None came. 2 men in security polos appeared at the glass door. Not aggressive, just present. The kind of presence that means your badge won't work anymore. Chad turned to Rose, eyes sharp now, glassy with something between fury and disbelief. "You think you've won?" he said, his voice low, venom barely contained. "Think this makes you clean?" She didn't move, didn't blink, didn't rise to meet the snarl. She just said it, soft, flat, and razor sharp. "No, I just stopped losing for a second." Nothing. Then Chad looked away, down, actually, as if something inside him folded. He turned, without another word, and walked toward the waiting guards, shoulders tight, footsteps fast. He didn't look back, not once. The doors hissed shut behind him with a pneumatic sigh. No cheers, no one clapped, but something subtle passed through the boardroom. A shift in posture, a loosening, the sense that the infection had been removed, and now the real healing, if there could be any, might finally begin. Chairman Reynolds cleared his throat. "We'll resume in 10 minutes to address interim executive placement." No one needed to say who that would be. The air already knew. Rose collected her folder, slid it shut with a gentle snap. She didn't rush. She stepped out into the hallway, past the wide windows that looked out over the city, gray and glowing in the fall light. Somewhere down there, Chad was probably already on the phone, rewriting history. But it didn't matter. That version of the story didn't live in this building anymore. She paused outside the boardroom, one hand on the handle. This wasn't a victory lap. This wasn't a throne reclaimed. Power didn't interest her the way it used to. Not after what it cost. Not after what she'd watched it corrupt. No, this wasn't about control. This was about repair. About reclaiming the bones of something decent and building again, without fear, without decay, without the stench of cheap ambition. She pushed the door open and walked back into the boardroom. The new motion was already on the table, fresh, clean. This story powerfully illustrates that genuine power isn't always loud or overt. It resides in quiet competence, meticulous preparation, and unwavering integrity. Rose's journey teaches us that even when you are underestimated, dismissed, or actively sabotaged, your deep knowledge, the truth, and your consistent dedication can become your most potent weapons. The positive message is clear. Don't let others define your worth or diminish your contributions. Value your expertise and commitment, even if it goes unrecognized for a time. When faced with injustice, equip yourself with facts and a clear strategy. True accountability will eventually prevail, not through anger or grand gestures, but through undeniable evidence and quiet resolve. Your resilience and capacity for strategic thinking can not only protect you, but also pave the way for a more ethical and functional environment for everyone.